captain handed over a copy of the recorded video of Dominic downloaded on a flash drive, Nathaniel and his men left the precinct as the officer shepherded Dominic out of the interrogation room to an empty cell. As soon as Nathaniel's entourage left the precinct, he sent the video of him speaking to Dominic in the interrogation room, and the one recorded of Dominic having a breakdown to the head of the Camorra family. Nathaniel checked his watch and waited. "Where to, boss?" Aidan asked from the driver's seat. "Evergreen Memorial Hospital. We are picking up Aria," Nathaniel responded, looking out of the window. Knowing that the next 24 hours were going to be like a keg of gunpowder placed precariously close to a bonfire, and knowing Ariana was somewhat going to be at the center of it, he needed to make sure she stayed close to him. It was also of great importance that they were able to anticipate and somewhat predict Henry Cavalier's reaction and be prepared for any outcome. Once again, Julia was putting his family in the line of fire, and he didn't like it. But he knew neither Aria nor Jake would let him wash his hands of the crazy woman. He let out a sigh. His phone rang, and Nathaniel first checked his watch, noting it was 10 minutes after sending the videos, before answering the call. "Hawthorne," he said into the phone. "When I said keep in touch, little Nate, this was not what I had in mind," a seasoned, deep voice said from the other end, making Nathaniel chuckle. The voice sounded gruff and raspy like that of an elderly man. "Buonasera, zio Sam, bello sentirti," Nathaniel responded in Neapolitan dialect, a small smile playing around his lips. "It's nice to hear from you, Uncle Sam," he said in English, and added, "I'm sorry I had to let you see that." The man sighed once more from the other end of the line, his tone conveying resignation and disappointment. Dominic has a habit of doing these things, and one would think after all these years I should be used to it, but, well, as a parent, you always hope for the best for your children. Unfortunately, Dominic is set in his ways, but I am sorry he brought that attitude to your doorstep. But don't worry, Henri will come to handle things and take him off your hands. As for the policemen who lost their lives, we will attempt to compensate for their losses. I say attempt, because can one truly compensate for the death of a person? Now, Nate, I know you and your inclination for a sense of justice and morality, so I'm going to ask you from a great-uncle to an adopted grandnephew that you let Henry take over. And please, if you are protecting Julia Davies in any way, wash your hands off her. I'd hate for you to be caught in the crossfire, the older man cautioned. Nathaniel released a sigh. The other man continued to speak. "Thank you for trying to save Travis, and please convey to your wife my gratitude for her efforts, despite the circumstances, but now, let Henry take over." Nathaniel didn't miss that he was emphasizing the last part of his statement. "Please promise me no more deaths," Nathaniel replied. A tense silence followed. "Little Nate, just walk away. No one would dare touch your family." "You have my word," the man replied, ignoring his question, and then added, "You should consider visiting Naples with your family for a vacation soon. Let's celebrate your good fortune. I heard you have 2 boys with more on the way?" The older man's voice sounded friendly and warm now with the choice of topic. "Yes, 2 boys and another 2 on the way," Nathaniel said with pride. The older man's chuckles resonated through the phone line. He wasn't surprised at all that the older man kept tabs on him. "And I bet they are as intelligent as you are. Boys can be both blessings and headaches sometimes, little Nate. Raise them well," the older man remarked. "Thank you, Uncle." "It would be an honor to visit you in Naples," Nathaniel replied. The two conversed for about 2 more minutes before the older man remarked, I hate to let you go, but if I don't agree to go for my walk, Anne will not stop hovering." Nathaniel chuckled. Anne, Samuel Cavalier's eldest daughter, had returned to the family house after losing her husband in a ghastly car accident, leaving her with 2 children, a boy and a girl. Samuel had asked her to come back home, and she had complied. She served as an assistant and caregiver to her father. Nathaniel recalled his father mentioning that Anne was the only one authorized to cook for him. "Please convey my greetings to her," Nathaniel said. "I will." "Take care now, little Nate," the older man said, ending the call. The smile on Nathaniel's face eased off as he noted what the older man had implied. He knew for certain that Julia would not escape this mess, and Dominic and Travis's fate was uncertain. He sent a message to the captain to inform him about the Camorra's plan for compensating the families of the deceased policemen. just to give him a heads up. Settling back in his seat, he was relieved that Jake had ridden with Anton and Greg. Aidan met his gaze through the rearview mirror just as Andrew peered back through the space between the front seats. Should we wait for the outcome of the meeting with Sean tomorrow before initiating Julia's disappearance? Andrew asked. Nathaniel let out a sigh. I don't think it would matter, but we will play our part to fulfill all righteousness, he replied. And what about the plastic surgery? Aidan chimed in. We will need to discuss that with Aria without revealing all the details. Whatever happens, I want her to know she helped, and that's that, Nathaniel declared in a firm tone. Andrew nodded and settled back into his seat. Back at Evergreen Memorial Hospital after thorough evaluation, Aria ensured that Travis Cavalier's name was added to a waiting list maintained by the local transplant center and organ procurement organization. She then made a few calls to her colleagues in the field, informing them of a patient in dire need of an urgent heart transplantation, with the promise to update her when anything comes up. Aria assigned nurses to keep tabs on Travis's condition. She managed to do a ward round, taking on Dr. Rowan's patients before preparing to close for the day. When Aria phoned Anita to check on Julia and see how Anita was getting on, Anita mentioned that Julia was already asleep and shared her plan to spend the night at the Hawthorne residence before fully resuming her duties the next morning. So then, once Jake returns, Andrew and I will come back to the house. I suppose we will have time to talk about the engagement and plans for the wedding then, Anita replied. Great. I would like to plan an engagement party for you, that is, if it's okay with you and Andrew, Aria replied, a smile stretching her lips. That would be great. I'm not going to say no to a chance to have a good time, she quipped. Aria chuckled. See you soon, Aria replied, and cut the line. Just as she got to the reception, the now automated double doors pulled open, and Nathaniel strode in, flanked by Aidan and Andrew. Charles and Jordan, who were sitting in a corner in the hospital reception, got up to join them. Aria's heart swelled with happiness at the warm smile that transformed Nathaniel's face upon seeing her. Good evening, Mr. Hawthorne, the hospital staff greeted one after the other, to which Nathaniel nodded in acknowledgement. Upon reaching her, he smiled down at her and said, Ready? Aria nodded and gladly snuggled into his arms for a hug as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Nathaniel pressed a kiss on the top of her head and ushered her to the exit. The following morning at the precinct, Sean Cavalier pushed back from the interrogation table, rose from the chair and began to pace. Tell me again, he demanded, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. Mr. Cavalier. You have already made me repeat myself twice, Captain replied, a frown furrowing his aged face with bemusement. I'm afraid this is a lot. I'm trying to understand. To take everything in, Sean retorted through gritted teeth, before pausing his strides and then came to stand by the table, pressing his palms onto the table to fix Captain with a piercing gaze. So you're telling me that Ricky, Archer Bellini's dog, raped my wife, impregnated her, sent someone to beat her to cause a miscarriage, and then my uncle took her despite knowing Ricky was the actual killer? Sean asked through gritted teeth. We still don't know how your uncle found out about that, Captain began, his voice trailing off. Come on, officer, I'm sure you found out it was me. I called Travis to find out what he knew. He accused Hawthorne and I debunked the claim. He also accused me and Julia as a result of a misunderstanding between Durham, Julia and me, and I debunked that too. He obviously told my uncle, who thought it was a great idea to come kidnap my wife without telling me first. And you say he is here? My uncle, Sean said, his eyes cold as ice. Captain nodded. Did he tell you where she is? Sean asked. Well, we don't know if he is trying to throw us off, but we overheard him threatening your dad yesterday, Captain said, pausing for effect. He threatened my dad, Sean scoffed. Now I know he's got a death wish, he added. He gave your dad a condition, asking him to save your cousin Travis and give him Miss Julia Davis's head, or he is going to kill you, Captain said, watching the other man for a reaction. Kill me? Sean repeated with a cold laugh. And he said that to my father, he repeated. Captain nodded, observing as Sean's eyes grew even chillier. He then nodded, muttering indistinctly under his breath, sounding like a low growl. And then he suddenly asked, So Dr. Everly Hawthorne treated Julia? His dark eyes scrutinized the other man's. Yes, Captain replied resolutely. So she has proof that Ricky raped Julia and it wasn't consensual? He asked again, as if to be doubly sure. Yes, it wasn't. Like I told you, Mrs. Julia stabbed Ricky in defense, and Ricky was arrested alongside his men when they threatened to blow up Evergreen Memorial Hospital, Captain replied. Was the hospital then the connection between Julia and the Hawthornes? He inquired once more. Captain nodded, appearing slightly puzzled. Sean Cavalier nodded silently to himself. Where is Ricky now? Sean demanded. He's still in custody. Dr. Hawthorne believes Mrs. Julia might want to press charges, but that was before she disappeared, Captain clarified. So, he won't be released? Sean queried. Not yet, but if your wife doesn't show up soon, we will have to let him go, Captain affirmed. And you have no updates about Julia? You don't know if my uncle has already killed her and is using this to retaliate against me and my father. Sean's voice was taut with contained anger. I'm afraid we haven't received any information about your wife yet, Captain responded. Did you question Ricky? Sean asked, scrutinizing Captain closely. The frown between the older man's brows deepened. He was our initial suspect, but he was injured and in police custody at the time, Captain explained. Sean nodded. Did you interrogate Nathaniel Hawthorne? Sean pressed. The furrow between the older man's brows deepened further. I mentioned earlier that they were the ones who reported Ricky's assault on Mrs. Cavalier, Captain reiterated. Yes. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you, Sean replied, averting his gaze. So, do you think you could assist us with talking to your uncle? Perhaps he could confess to his actions and provide insight into what happened to your wife, Captain probed. Given my father's involvement, I believe we'll uncover the truth soon. But if you receive any information about Julia's whereabouts, I would appreciate it if you contacted me first. Please, he implored, maintaining eye contact with the other man. Captain nodded slowly. I understand, he replied. Sean chuckled bitterly. You understand? I highly doubt it. Thank you, though. I must leave now, he stated. Captain nodded and escorted him out. Watching from the witness room via the one-way mirror, Andrew and Jake exchanged a glance. Jake couldn't help but notice Sean Cavalier's clenched fists as he left, his posture rigid as if restraining a particular reaction. His jaw was set with evident determination, and his eyes were dark and cold. He's going to kill Ricky, Andrew muttered. Yep, Jake concurred with a sigh. Meanwhile, at Evergreen Memorial Hospital, Aria was exiting Rowan's office when she heard someone call out to her from her left. She turned in that direction and noticed about 10 men approaching her, led by a tall, impeccably dressed man, radiating an air of power and danger. His rugged handsomeness and streaks of grey hair on either side of his temples were hard to miss. From his fashionable bowler hat to his long dark jacket and Italian leather shoes, it was obvious he was a wealthy man. She found herself momentarily captivated by his presence until he stood about 6 feet away, and she noticed there were 2 men with their heads covered with black sacks behind the man. Upon getting to her, the 2 men were pushed forward and made to kneel a few feet from her. Dr. Hawthorne? The man called out again, and Aria nodded in acknowledgement. Good day, she responded, her gaze shifting from the man to the 2 kneeling figures on the hallway pristine flooring. Your pictures don't do you justice. You look far more beautiful in person, the man remarked in a deep, distinct baritone. Aria furrowed her brows in bemusement. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? She inquired. Henri Cavalier, the man replied, offering a slight playful bow. Oh, you're... Aria began, but the man nodded before she could finish. I'm Travis's uncle. I believe you mentioned he needs a heart, the man stated. Yes, he was brought in with a bullet wound to the heart. We attempted surgery to remove the bullet and repair the damage, but it was unsuccessful and his blood pressure continued to rise, forcing us to stop, Aria explained. Understood. Do you have a donor lined up? The man asked, interrupting her. No, but we've added his name to the waiting list, she started to say, momentarily distracted by the 2 men with bags over their heads. Please, who are these people and why are their heads covered? Before she could finish, 2 of the men behind the tall man stepped forward, revealing a cooler containing a still beating heart. Where did you obtain those? Aria inquired, her voice filled with dread. We brought 2 hearts for you, Doctor. In addition, we have living donors available in case these hearts aren't suitable, he explained. What? I'm sorry, you can't simply walk in here with a heart. Aria began, gaping at the tall man. Aria couldn't quite fathom how an individual with no medical background or authority could think they could just stroll into a hospital with a human organ meant for transplantation, along with living, breathing donors. It was a no-brainer that these people weren't the regular kind, which made her start to wonder again where and why Travis Cavalier got shot. Every attempt to get a straightforward answer from Nathaniel had proven useless. He had simply said the patient was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Aria didn't fail to notice that the security of the house had been heightened, and Nathaniel seemed glued to her side since the incident, despite having a conglomerate to run. She had a feeling that the Travis guy had somewhat posed a threat to her family. Perhaps that was where he got shot, just like Julia. She was pondering how the men of that number were able to stroll into the hospital premises without the hospital security men escorting them when she saw Nathaniel appear at the end of the hallway, flanked by Aidan and Charles, with 5 of the newly employed security personnel following them from behind. Henri Cavalier must have seen her looking in that direction, because he stopped mid-sentence in his response to her, to look back, and a smile stretched his lips. "Hello, Nate," he greeted Nathaniel. "Henry," Nathaniel acknowledged as he came to stand beside Aria, his stance protective and daring. "I see you've come prepared," he remarked as his eyes lowered to the organ coolers. "I was about to explain myself to your beautiful wife." "I can assure you it's all legitimate," Henri replied. He then gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward to provide detailed documentation, confirming the source of the hearts, including medical history, consent forms, and necessary legal paperwork. After Nathaniel reviewed it, he passed it to Aria, who quickly went through it. A frown furrowed her eyebrows at the detailed information. She had no idea how things were done where these gentlemen came from, but here in the United States there were certain procedures for these things, and non-medically trained folks were not allowed to just carry around organs. She thought to let the hospital legal representative know to inform the police, just to be doubly careful, even though it was evident the organs were procured legitimately. "If you wouldn't mind waiting in reception, I'll conduct the necessary tests to ensure the hearts are a match for Mr. Travis," Aria said, locking eyes with Henry. He nodded in acknowledgement, a glint of respect in his dark eyes, at the way Aria stared directly into his eyes, appearing not to be intimidated by him or his entourage. Henri Cavalier instructed his men to leave the organs with her. He then offered Nathaniel a handshake, which he accepted. "Please escort Mr. Cavalier to the private waiting room and make sure he is taken care of," Nathaniel said to the hospital security staff. "Yes, boss," they chorused. "I'll be with you shortly, Henry," Nathaniel directed at the other man. He nodded in acknowledgement and said, "I'm going to stay till the surgery is done because I need to leave here with Travis." The statement caught Aria's attention, making her look up from the document she was still reviewing to gape at the tall man again. "You can't do that. We have to monitor him." "Administering post-surgery care," Aria protested, glowering at the man. He chuckled, causing his eyes to dim and wrinkles to form at the corners of his eyes and lips. "Unless you intend to return to Naples with me, Dr. Hawthorne, I think we can handle my nephew post-surgery," he teased. "But," Aria made to argue, but Nathaniel placed a hand on the small of her back to stop her. Aria gave him a sidelong glance. "I'm certain Mr. Cavalier has made arrangements for post-surgery care." "Considering he arrived with 2 human hearts," Nathaniel reasoned, giving Aria a meaningful stare. She nodded cautiously and lowered her gaze. "Okay," she replied, and began to leave, but Nathaniel's hand on her back tightened, keeping her in place. "Go ahead, Henry." "Tell me about your plans," Nathaniel probed. "Well, I plan to visit the police precinct after we leave here to deal with our mutual problem," he replied. Nathaniel nodded. "Will you be leaving New York today, then?" Nathaniel inquired with interest. "No, it wouldn't be right to come all this way and not see my son after all. His wife started all of this and conveniently went missing," he replied, giving Nathaniel and Aria a brief nod before turning away. The hospital security escorted the group down the hallway. Nathaniel didn't move until they were out of sight. He then opened Rowan's office door and guided Aria inside, leaving Aidan, Charles, and Jordan outside with the coolers containing the organs. As soon as he shut the door behind them, he pulled Aria into a tight hug before drawing back to frame her face with his hands. Ariana, I need you to listen to me. Check the organs to see if any matches and perform the surgery as quickly as possible. I don't want that man here. I don't want him anywhere near you, do you understand? Nathaniel said in a low, intense tone. Aria attempted to speak, but he shook his head. Don't ask questions, baby. Let's proceed and resolve this swiftly so these people can leave our lives. Understood? Nathaniel insisted. Aria sensed the tension in his voice and nodded in agreement. After testing one of the hearts for compatibility and finding it wasn't, Aria grew apprehensive, knowing that if the second one also wasn't compatible, it would mean a death sentence for the two men with bags over their heads. Her anxiety spiked as she processed the second heart, and a sigh of relief escaped her lips when she saw the results. Nathaniel stood with her throughout, lovingly rubbing his hand up and down her back and occasionally pulling her into his arms, pressing a kiss on her head and forehead. Okay, let's do this, she said with fervor to her surgical team. They immediately prepared the patient for surgery, wheeling him to the operating room. Nathaniel pulled Aria back for a quick but deep kiss before she strode into the surgery room. He didn't leave, though. He stayed in the hallway leading to the surgery, sitting on a long bench. Any news from Andrew? Nathaniel directed at his men. Sean Cavalier left the police precinct an hour ago. Andrew and Jake are trailing him. Aidan supplied. Nathaniel nodded with a sigh, rubbing his hands over his face. He couldn't quite wait for everything to be over. I hope someone is stationed with Anita, Nathaniel asked, deliberately not mentioning Julia. Yes, boss. Andrew handled that, Charles replied. Nathaniel nodded and settled back on the bench. Meanwhile, Andrew and Jake tailed Sean to his house and waited in the car at a considerable distance, watching his house. Around 7 p.m., they watched as a dark green van pulled to a stop in front of his house and just waited there. Shortly after, Sean came out of his house wearing black military gear and entered the car. Showtime, Jake muttered as they watched the van leave the curb. They waited about 2 minutes before following the van. Ricky and his men were being held in pre-trial detention facilities created for arrested individuals awaiting trial in the Adirondack Mountains, which was close to 250 miles away from Sean's apartment. Andrew and Jake settled in for a long drive. Back at Evergreen Memorial Hospital, Aria stepped back for an intern to stitch up the opening in Travis Cavalier's chest after they had finished the heart transplantation. Her eyes darting about the digital medical devices stationed against the walls, monitoring and noting the patient's vitals to ensure everything was as it should be. Once the intern stepped back and the patient was being prepared to be moved to the intensive care ward, Aria left, heading to the adjoining washroom to clean up and change her blood-spattered scrubs. A few minutes later, she exited the surgery ward and saw that Nathaniel had waited all through the surgery. Nathaniel stood up as soon as he saw her. How did it go? He asked, sounding tired. Aria flashed him a tired smile and replied, It was a success. Aidan let out an audible sigh. Come, my love, let's inform Cavalier, he urged. Aria was surprised to find Henry Cavalier had waited, as he said he would. She thought he didn't seem like the kind of man who would wait for anything, or perhaps she was mistaken. Upon reaching the private lodge where Nathaniel had the men settled, Aria found the men watching European football, and the coffee table in front of the lodging sofas was laden with expensive wines and finger food. There was also a case of expensive Cuban cigars with an ashtray. The scent of the rich smoke mingled with the aroma of the food, drinks, and expensive cologne, somewhat making one forget this was still a hospital and not some den of adult fun for the wealthy. Henry Cavalier stood up as soon as he saw Aria and Nathaniel, and the anxious look he passed from Nathaniel to Aria betrayed his steely composure. How did it go? Henry asked, his voice calm and bland, not betraying his mood. It went well. Thankfully, he has been taken to intensive care, Aria supplied, weariness evident in her eyes and posture. Henry's lips stretched in the semblance of a smile, but his eyes grew somewhat cold, almost as if he was disappointed. A frown pulled at Aria's eyebrows. Good job, Doctor, Henri replied, and then gave one of his men a side glance. The man quickly made a call and said 3 words, "We are ready," before ending the call. "Would you be needing my assistance for anything?" Nathaniel inquired. Henry shook his head, directing his attention to him. "Thanks for the offer, but you've helped us enough." "Thank you, and you too, Dr. Hawthorne," Henry said, and then gestured to his men. Nathaniel pulled Aria to the side with Aidan and Charles flanking them as they watched the men file out. A few minutes later, Travis was carried on a stretcher into a helicopter on the hospital rooftop. Aria was relieved to see what appeared to be paramedics in the helicopter, along with an older man in a white doctor's robe. They waited for the helicopter to depart before heading back downstairs. Henri Cavalier had already left by road, and Nathaniel knew where he was headed. "Do you still have anything to do here, my love?" Nathaniel asked Aria, trying not to rush her. "Thankfully, no. The other doctors took care of post-surgery follow-ups," Aria replied. "So can we leave?" Nathaniel inquired, raising his eyebrows quizzically. Aria smiled at him. "All right, let's go." "It seems you've had your fill of this place for today," she remarked. Nathaniel chuckled in response. However, upon reaching the house, Aria was surprised when Nathaniel said, "Go on in, my love. I will join you in a bit," right after she exited the Jeep. "What? Are you still going out?" she asked, disappointment clouding her tone. "Give me 10 minutes. I just need to quickly check something," Nathaniel urged, kissing her before waiting as she reluctantly climbed the porch stairs and entered the foyer before he shut the door and said, "We need to hurry, Aidan." Henri had about a 20-minute head start, and they needed to catch up. "Yes, boss," Aidan replied, quickly reversing the Jeep. When they arrived at the precinct, Henri Cavalier was exiting the police station, 2 of his men flanking Dominic and literally dragging him. A frown creased Nathaniel's forehead as he watched intently, noting that Dominic seemed unable to walk unaided. One man opened the back door, and Dominic was carried inside. Nathaniel watched with narrowed gaze, noting that the other man struggled, albeit furtively, before they succeeded in putting him in the car. Shortly after, Nathaniel saw the Jeep shake for a few minutes before it moved. He waited until the entourage had gone, checking his watch. 10 minutes later, he exited the Jeep with Aidan and Charles walking to the lot where the Jeep that took Dominic away was parked. A trace of crimson-colored liquid on the ground caught his attention. Charles crouched to touch the liquid, rubbing it between his fingertips. He then looked up to hold Nathaniel's gaze. "It's blood," he supplied. Nathaniel nodded, turned and entered the precinct, with Aidan and Charles quickly following him. They found the captain in his office, watching a recording with bafflement etched on his face. He looked up when he heard the door open, and Nathaniel walked in with Charles and Aidan. "What happened here?" Nathaniel asked. The captain gestured to the TV screen, and Nathaniel directed his gaze in that direction. They watched as Henri entered Dominic's cell, and Dominic started to rage at him. Henri Cavalier appeared as calm as ever, but then he stepped closer to Dominic, and his left hand moved so fast and deftly that they needed to look carefully to catch the movement. It was as if Henri had punched Dominic in the stomach, but only when he stepped back, the other man lowered to his knees, clutching his stomach. Henri's men quickly flanked him, and they dragged Dominic out, with Henri leading them. "Is it me, or did Henri Cavalier just stab his brother?" the captain asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. "Judging by the trail of blood in the parking lot, I can assure you, he indeed stabbed his brother," Aidan replied. Captain threw him a look filled with awe before lowering into his seat. He rubbed his hands against his face and muttered, "I know we wanted justice, but this still doesn't feel right." Nathaniel patted the older man on the back of his shoulder, noting the 3 black briefcases piled on his desk. "I take it these are the Camora's compensation?" Nathaniel inquired, gesturing to the cases. The captain let out a sigh. "Yes, cases full of money. Blood money," he muttered. The phone on his desk rang at the same time Nathaniel's phone rang. Nathaniel stepped away to a corner to receive his call just as the captain pressed the speakerphone button of the landline and said, "Captain Smith speaking." A voice from the other line replied, "We are under attack, Captain, and your detainees have been taken." The voice sounded urgent, filled with dread. "Taken? By whom? What the hell do you mean?" Captain probed. Just then, Nathaniel heard Andrew's distinct voice say from the other end of the line, "Sean just executed Ricky and all his men." Nathaniel's heart raced. "All of them?" he rasped in shock. All of them, Andrew replied. Where? Where did he take them? Nathaniel probed. Nowhere. He broke them out of the facility and lined them up right in front of the building, and he and 4 other men opened fire on them. Andrew supplied. Including Ricky, Nathaniel pressed. Ricky wasn't so lucky, boss, Andrew responded, and proceeded to tell him how Sean had beaten Ricky to within an inch of his life before executing him. You are saying they are all dead? Nathaniel heard the captain bellow in shock. Where are you guys? Nathaniel asked in a tense tone. On our way back, Andrew replied. Jake caught everything on the camera, he added. Get the hell out of there. And be safe, Nathaniel cautioned. Yes, boss. Greg said Henri Cavalier is in town, Andrew remarked. Was Dominic released to him? He questioned. Yes, Nathaniel replied, and let out a sigh. Anton is monitoring them. It looks like they are headed to the airport. But Henri Cavalier isn't with them, Andrew said. Nathaniel grew tense. We just saw him leave with Dominic, he replied. Greg said he changed cars and is now headed to Sean Cavalier's house. Nathaniel didn't like that news. He didn't like it at all. Even though Henry had informed him of his plans earlier, he had thought he would still leave with Dominic. Nathaniel and his men left the police station, leaving Captain to manage the latest crisis. As Nathaniel's jeep cruised along the Upper East Side toward his house, his thoughts danced between the day's events and the looming uncertainty of what lay ahead. The vibrant energy of the city surrounded them, punctuated by the occasional wail of sirens and blare of horns from New York's bustling streets. Suddenly, Aiden's gasp drew Nathaniel's attention outside and upward, where they caught sight of a plane ascending from LaGuardia Airport, engulfed in flames. A plume of smoke billowed from the aircraft's engine, casting a dark shadow over the sky. Bringing the vehicle to a halt, Nathaniel, Charles, Aiden, and Jordan stepped out of the jeep, their gazes fixed upward in shock and disbelief. Passers-by on the sidewalk murmured, their faces reflecting the horror of the scene unfolding above. Nathaniel's mind raced with questions, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of his stomach as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. He had a foreboding sense that this was more than just a tragic accident. As Charles's phone rang, and he answered it, Nathaniel knew in his heart what the news would be. Dominic Cavalier had met his end, possibly alongside his son, Travis, which made him wonder as to why Henry had bothered to let Travis undergo the heart transplantation. Andrew and Jake arrived back on Madison Avenue, seeking a discreet spot to park before making their way to Aria's former residence. Throughout the journey, not a word passed between them. Even in the elevator, they stood side by side, lost in their thoughts. The recent violence they had witnessed stirred memories of their past selves and the struggles they had faced to leave that life behind. The act of taking lives almost eroded their humanity, that it got to a point that killing seemed like routine, a mere action of pulling a trigger or wielding a knife with just the perfect precision. Although therapy and the induction into a family like the Hawthornes had helped them find a semblance of rebirth, the darkness within lingered like an indelible mark, waiting just beneath the skin to surface. As they strolled down the hallway leading to the apartment, echoes of cries of impending eternal end filled their minds, accompanied by the haunting image of Sean Cavalier's cold, resigned stare as he mercilessly slaughtered his victims. Though they had watched from a considerable distance, they had witnessed the fury with which Sean had fought Ricky. It had been palpable, and Ricky had made the mistake of mocking Sean, taunting him with words about how he used his wife's body and how she had carried his child. With each confession, Sean's blows grew more brutal. Jake blinked, recalling how Ricky's face had been bathed in blood and terribly battered. Sean had tortured him with his bare hands before delivering the fatal blow. Jake had expected a sense of satisfaction at the sight, but instead, he felt nothing. But then the thought of the other man unleashing such force of fury on Julia had kindled a protective surge within him. He wondered how much of Sean's fury stemmed from love for his wife and pure male pride. Ricky hadn't just violated Sean Cavalier's wife. He had disrespected Sean in the worst possible way in their world. Sean's message was clear. Despite the appearance of docility, he was far from tamed. and both the Comoras and their enemies would be reminded now of who Sean Cavalier was and still is. Another message Jake gleaned from the ordeal was that Sean Cavalier genuinely cared for Julia, and he wondered whether she reciprocated his feelings. He wondered whether Sean could protect his wife from his own father. Or, to save face, he would let his old man end Julia's life to preserve his honor. Nonetheless, Nathaniel Hawthorne's words resonated within him. Trusting Julia would be a risk, potentially leading to their inadvertent destruction, especially with Henri Cavalier involved. Sean seemed to mirror his father's nature, and Jake had reliable information that Henry was soulless, to the extent that even his own father didn't trust him with his health. Henry was ruthless and cunning, a dangerous adversary to confront. Jake reminded himself once again that Julia had chosen to be with Sean, and for obvious reasons. He wasn't terrible looking and had power, the kind of dangerous power that appealed to women like Julia. But to Jake, she had been merely a one-night stand. Despite their efforts to help her, her fate now rested in the hands of the Comoras. And it would do well for him to remember that. Andrew knocked on the door of the apartment and then pressed the doorbell twice, a signal to the guards inside. The sound of the door unlocking reached his ears before it pulled open. "Hey," Thomas greeted. "Everything okay here?" Andrew said as the other man stepped aside for them to walk inside. Jake nodded his greetings to the other guy, which he reciprocated with a playful pat on his pectorals. "Yeah, everything's fine here," Thomas replied as he locked the door. Strolling into the open-floor living room, Jake's eyes darted about as he mentally noted each position of the guards and their number. Though it meant nothing really, it was a habit of his to note positions and mentally try to imagine finding himself in dangerous scenarios and what he would do to get out of it. In this particular scenario, only 2 of the guards were awake. The rest were littered about the living room, asleep. One was on the floor behind a 3-seater couch with only his boots visible. Another was in a corner of the room on a chair with his face covered with a hat, and the third one was on a 2-seater couch sleeping with his face turned away from the door. "We heard you guys had such a fun night," Gabriel, the second guard who was awake, remarked from the kitchen area. Jake directed his gaze in that direction and saw the guy was brewing coffee. The aroma filled the air, mixing with the scent of sizzling pancakes, bacon, and eggs. His stomach rumbled. "I wouldn't call watching 10 men executed fun," Andrew responded before Jake could. "I hope you intend to make a lot of those," Jake said, gesturing to the pancakes. Then he added, "I'm hungry." Gabriel chuckled. "Was there any time you weren't hungry, Jake?" the other man teased. Jake made an irritated face at him before approaching the island table. "Whoa, so Camorra killed 10 men in retaliation?" Thomas replied. "Yes, he did," Jake muttered as he took a seat, and Gabriel served him some pancakes, eggs, and bacon. "Thanks, man," he said. "Andrew?" Gabriel called, gesturing to the coffee and pancakes. Andrew shrugged. "Why not? I might as well. It's going to be a long day," he remarked. "The boss and his team had a similar experience," Gabriel said. Andrew and Jake paused their actions to give him a quizzical glance. "You haven't heard?" he added, looking from Jake to Andrew. "Heard what?" Jake inquired, his voice filled with impatience and had a hardened edge to it. "Henri Camorra is doing cleanup, that's why he's here. He didn't come to help his nephew or brother. He came to engineer their end," Gabriel explained, just as Thomas came to take the empty seat beside Andrew. Jake and Andrew exchanged an uncomfortable glance before Andrew directed his attention back to Gabriel. "Are you telling me Henry killed 2 of his family?" Andrew said in awe. "Yes. Made them blow up at LaGuardia Airport for everyone to see. It's all over the news. It was like the 4th of July fireworks," Thomas replied. "The man is sick," Gabriel remarked with acute conviction. "Did Dr. Hawthorne perform the surgery, though, on Travis Cavalier?" Jake asked, sounding bemused. "Yes, they airlifted him to the airport afterward," Gabriel replied. "Can you believe that?" he added, shaking his head. "He was the one who brought the heart, 2 hearts actually, with 2 other donors. Those people are mental." Thomas chimed in. Jake swallowed softly, lowering his eyes to his food, and automatically started to eat. "Are you guys certain nothing suspicious has happened here since we've been gone?" Andrew asked, his voice tensed. "Yes. Dr. Hawthorne's patient is still inside her room, and Miss Anita spent most of the day taking care of her and cooking. She stuffed the whole fridge with ready-to-eat dishes, Gabriel replied with a smile, and went to open the double-door refrigerator for them to see. She is the best, Thomas remarked with evident pleasure. Andrew shook his head. I have a feeling that food is what they are going to use to disarm us one day, he grumbled in jest, making the other two chuckled. Jake couldn't shake off what he had just heard. If Henri Cavalier could be that brutal to his own blood, then any hope of Sean dissuading him regarding Julia seemed futile. He wondered if Sean himself was safe from his own father. Is he still in town? Jake suddenly asked, interrupting the other men's chatter. Who? Thomas replied, while Gabriel lifted an eyebrow quizzically. Henri Cavalier. Is he still here in the United States? Jake repeated. Yes. The last intel was that he'd gone to Sean Cavalier's house. He's looking for his daughter-in-law, Gabriel supplied. Jake nodded and lowered his gaze, missing the concerned glance Andrew threw his way. When he raised his eyes in the other man's direction, he could tell they were both thinking the same thing. For how long could they truly hide her from her fate? Hours before, after witnessing the end of two Comoras by one of their own, Nathaniel gestured to his men to get back into the jeep. Navigating their way home, the captain's call came through, and Nathaniel answered after the first ring. Have you heard what just happened? The older man asked over the phone, his voice tinged with awe. I saw it, Nathaniel replied, his voice withdrawn. I told you the Comoras have a way of taking care of their trash, he added with resignation. Upon reaching the house, he bid his men good night and made his way to his wing of the house. He wasn't surprised to see Aria still awake. He smiled to himself when he saw she had his dinner brought to the room. Are you okay, baby? She asked, in a soft, warm voice tinged with affection. Yes, my love. I am fine, he replied, and then added, I'm going to take a quick shower, as he started to take off his clothes and headed to the bathroom. Much later, when he lay on the bed with his body enveloping hers, she said, I can't get today's event with that Cavalier guy out of my mind. I hope Travis will pull through. Nathaniel let out a sigh, tightening his arms around her, not knowing how to tell her there was never any chance of that. I'm sorry I brought those people into our lives, my love, but I'm not sorry we helped Julia, though, she whispered. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and she shifted in his arms to face him, burrowing her face in the nook of his neck. It's okay, baby, Nathaniel responded, his voice low and warm with emotion. You did the right thing. That's all that counts. He drew back a little from her to cup her by the side of her neck, using his thumb to stroke her jawline before he moved lower to draw her bottom lip into his mouth with his teeth, and slowly suckled. Aria trembled, a shiver of pleasure skating through her as a moan escaped her lips. Nathan! The sound commanded a profound surge of need within Nathaniel. His hold on her neck tightened, and his kisses grew fervent as he delved his tongue into her mouth, exploring before capturing the tip of her tongue to suckle provocatively. Aria ran her fingers down his taut pectorals and down to his stomach, feeling his body grow tight and tense as her hands disappeared into the band of his boxers. Nathaniel's loud guttural growl filled the air as he rose from the bed without breaking contact, his muscles rippling beautifully under the dim lighting of the room. Aria panted as his hands wrapped around her thighs, and he yanked her downward as he settled between them. Back at Madison Avenue, after the other guards left, Andrew joined Anita in a room just down the hallway. Jake didn't think it was necessary for him to stay in the same room with Julia, especially after seeing how peaceful she appeared now, sleeping. Although she didn't look different from that morning, he figured, since she'd survived thus far, she was going to be just fine. He chose the room next to hers and went to take a hot shower before getting into bed. Sometime later, he woke to the sound of a quiet thud, followed by a curse. Jake had always been a light sleeper, something born out of pure self-preservation. He had to sleep lightly to know when his father decided it was time for him to get a beating, or chose to batter his mother after that part of his life was over. The ability turned into a survival tactic. At some point, it was a miracle he even got any shut-eye at all, but that too passed. Getting up from the bed, he put on a white vest and padded out of the room to investigate. Opening the door to Julia's room, he found her on the floor taking deep, practiced breaths. His eyebrows furrowed. "What are you doing?" he asked in a hesitant tone and watched as she turned her face in his direction. I need to go to the bathroom," she said, stuttering. "You could, call for help," he replied with a gentle tug at the corner of his lips. "I'm already too much trouble," she replied, each word enunciated with care. Strange," Jake responded, and crouched by her side, watching as her eyes traveled down his body before darting up to meet his gaze. "I could help," he added. She nodded. Jake gathered her into his arms and effortlessly lifted her, carrying her to the bathroom. "What exactly do you want to do?" he asked upon reaching the bathroom, wondering where to put her. "Toilet seat," she said, her voice low and hesitant, making Jake look down at her face and watch as color bloomed on her high cheekbones. "Okay," he rasped, and put her carefully on the toilet seat. Then he stood back, noting how her face was etched with pain as she struggled to stay upright. "You can go, thank you," she said in almost a whisper, evidently embarrassed as the sound of her peeing resounded in the enclosed space. "Is there anything else you need?" he asked, his voice warm and tender. She raised her eyes to hold his gaze. "I would like a real bath, but I can't," she replied in a hushed tone. "Anita said I have to be content with bed baths until getting water on my wounds is no longer an issue," she said, giving him a searching gaze. "But you want a bath?" he asked, folding his arms against his chest. "Yeah, a long hot bath," she replied with a hint of a smile. "Maybe I can help with that," Jake said, without first thinking about what he was offering. Then the gleam of interest and delight in her eyes made it difficult to take the offer back. Julia had head surgery and her ankle was broken and in a cast. To give her a proper bath, he would have to be the one to bathe her. Naturally, when people bathe, they have to take off their clothes, which was an important factor he hadn't considered before the offer. "Unless, of course, you mind me seeing you naked then, you will have to leave your clothes on," he said again and clenched his jaw, wondering if the events of the past few days had done something to his brain. There was no way he just said that out loud. "Sorry, that was weird," he quickly added in a goofy way, watching as her lips stretched into a smile. Then she flinched and relaxed her facial muscles. "Can I ask you a question?" she said. He shrugged. "Shoot," he replied. "If you are not my husband, why do I get the feeling we've been intimate? Like you've known me intimately?" she asked, giving him a keen scrutiny. "We may have. Once. I mean several times within the span of 12 hours, he replied, the sides of his eyes wrinkling in amusement. He almost laughed when she turned bright pink. "So I cheated with you?" she inquired, without meeting his gaze. "Not at the time," Jake replied without clarifying. Her eyes flew back to hold his at that information. "Was I with you then? Before this?" She gestured to her wedding ring. "Not really. We just, found out we were physically attracted to each other and explored it. Thoroughly," he responded, having immense fun torturing her like this. "Oh," she replied, looking away and then looking back at him but not at his face. Her eyes trailed down his front before she swallowed and looked away. Jake felt utterly turned on. He then saw her freeze as she saw her reflection on the white tiled wall. Her chest heaved as she drew each breath, a cry of horror emitting from her as she raised a shaky hand to her face and then her head. Jake watched as she struggled with the onslaught of emotions before she looked away from her reflection with disgust. "Jules, Giselle," Jake muttered in a soft, comforting tone, but she refused to glance in his direction again. "How can you even look at me? I look like a monster," she whispered in anguish. "Can you please go?" she added. "Are you done peeing?" Jake asked through gritted teeth, a tad angry with her. "Yes, I'm done. Can you please go?" she pleaded in a broken voice, her movements jerky as she clumsily cleaned up. Despite her awkwardness, she managed to handle it herself. Jake waited until she attempted to get up on her own before stepping forward to carefully lift her up, ignoring her weak protests, and seated her in front of the extended platform in front of the mirror. He stood between her legs and gently framed her face with his large hands. "Why do you always focus on the unimportant things?" he said in a low, almost frustrated tone. "Nobody here cares what you look like. You shouldn't either. You just survived death when your body should be rotting now. And you care about your looks, really? Jake said with an impassioned tone. Someone who truly cares about you wouldn't give a damn about what you look like. Your scars are the marks of survival. You ought to wear them proudly. He watched as she slowly opened her eye, craning her neck to look into his. I don't repulse you then? She whispered, her voice filled with emotion. How can you not get disgusted at looking at me, Jake? I am not that dumb. Besides, it's a breath of fresh air to see you not look perfect for once. He quipped, making her laugh despite the situation. But then her eye grew tender and misty, and she suddenly leaned in and kissed him. Jake went very still. Jake remembered that back at the speakeasy where he had first met Julia, she was the one who had initiated the first kiss. She had stared into his eyes and kissed him. He had been a tad intoxicated and too tired to continue resisting her, thinking then that the alcohol had contributed to the frenzy of lust that consumed them both that night. Although the kiss she was giving him now was far from the brazen one she had given him that night, it still sparked something in him. Julia was a beautiful, desirable woman. Having her then had been a thrill, but now it felt different, more tamed. Although the lust was still there was a hint of vulnerability to it that made Jake feel uneasy. Having meaningless sex with some vixen at a bar was different from encouraging something more with a woman who had been beaten and trodden upon repeatedly for days now. Knowing how it would end only made it feel worse. I'm sorry, Julia whispered as she drew back from him, lowering her gaze and tilting her head sideways. I shouldn't have done that. I was, curious to know what it would feel like to kiss you. Jake couldn't think of what to say without seeming like he was rejecting her or sounding like all he could offer was temporary comfort. When he didn't speak, she raised her good eye to look at him. Jake met her gaze, noting the streak of blood still in her eye. Say something, please, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to hurt you, he rasped. She nodded, a faltering smile appearing on her lips that still had cuts and now reddish from the kiss. Jake swallowed softly, stomping on his longings. When a tear dropped from her eye, he realized she had misunderstood his reply. He raised his hands to frame her neck, his thumb stroking her jaw and moving slowly to the plump flesh of her lips. He watched as her lips parted at his touch, her breathing quickened and her lashes fluttered. Look at me, Jake rasped, his voice low and deep with desire. She met his gaze. I told you we had sex, do you understand? He said, stroking the edge of her lower lip with his thumb. I am incapable of giving more. So if this is a mere experiment, he continued, tilting his head to the side with a teasing smile, then I won't hold back. But I need you not to expect anything more. We come from different worlds, and that gap can't be bridged. He watched as her eye darted in its socket while she listened to him. That's what I mean when I say I don't want to hurt you. Not that I don't want to have you because of any imagined disabilities, he concluded. Apart from this bridge you speak of, is there anything else holding you back? She questioned with feeling. Giselle, Jake muttered huskily, moving closer to stand between her legs. Is my marriage the bridge? Why am I married to another when I want you so much? She whispered with emotion. You say that because you don't have your memories. When they return, trust me, you won't want to be near me. Not by a mile, maybe even more, he quipped. You don't like me. We're just physically attracted to each other, that's it, Jake added, trying to lighten the mood to keep her at ease. Did I tell you that? She replied, not breaking eye contact. You didn't need to tell me, he replied. Maybe that's what I wanted you to feel. Or maybe I didn't realize it myself. Maybe you scare me by how you make me feel, and I had to put that bridge there to make it insurmountable, she whispered, filled with emotion. I highly doubt that, Jules. I mean Giselle. But you sound way too perceptive for someone with brain trauma. Are you sure you're not messing with me? Jake said, narrowing his eyes. Dr. Hawthorne said losing my memory doesn't mean I've lost my ability to automatically know things and act as I did before. I just don't have the pictures in my head of where I fit into them, she replied with a raised eyebrow. I haven't gone stupid because I don't have any memories, Jake, she added. How disappointing, Jake replied, a pensive gleam in his eyes. She playfully smacked him on the chest, making him chuckle. "Maybe it's for the best," she muttered. "What's for the best?" Jake inquired with curiosity. "I think it's for the best that I don't remember. I can sense you all don't trust me, and whatever I did to earn that distrust must be one of the bridges between us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She then raised her left hand to slip her fingers into the band of Jake's boxers. Holding his gaze, Jake felt her stroking his stomach. His body grew taut with tension. "I really don't want bridges between us, Jake," she whispered. "I want to lie in that bed with you and experiment. I really want to experiment with you, Jake." For a few seconds, Jake stood there close to her, letting her touch him. Then he drew back, carried her to the bed, pulled the covers up to her chest and headed for the exit, trying to ignore how his body was begging for release. For the next few days, Jake diligently assisted Anita with helping Julia with her daily routine. He helped Anita carry Julia to the bathroom and back, and pitched in with heavy lifting, while Anton and Greg continued to monitor Sean Cavalier's movements. After 2 weeks, during which Henri Cavalier remained at large in the United States, the captain called Nathaniel to inform him that they had established a plan for Julia Cavalier to disappear. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be in touch shortly," Nathaniel replied, ending the call before returning to drying his hair. Having just returned from the office, he'd hurried to take his bath with the intent of joining his family for dinner. They were scheduled to travel to Hawaii the following week for the Harvard student reunion, and Nathaniel wanted to resolve the issue before their departure. He hadn't yet discussed whether the boys would accompany them, but Nathaniel felt uneasy about leaving them behind. Andrew, as the head of security, would be joining them, along with Charles, Aidan, and Jake. Not that he didn't trust the rest of his team to guard the house well in their absence, but he would feel much better if Andrew, Jake, Charles, or Aidan stayed behind. However, Andrew had a habit of bringing his top men on any trip outside the mainland of the United States. Selecting casual attire, Nathaniel quickly dressed and headed out. Upon entering the dining room, Nathaniel observed everyone already present. Tom Hill sat beside his girlfriend, Bella, as usual. Anita occupied one side of the boys, next to Owen, while Aria's aunt, Miss Everly, sat beside Liam, effectively boxing in the boys. Aria was assisting Mrs. Jonas and the house servants with setting bowls of food at the center of the table. As always, Nathaniel's heart raced at the sight of her. She wore a loose A-line gown to conceal her pregnancy, her lovely skin glowing under the dim lighting of the room. Nathaniel wondered when seeing her would become routine, because if she continued to have this effect on him, he'd be in real trouble. "Daddy!" Owen called out upon spotting him. "Dad, help!" Liam cried dramatically as they attempted to get out of their chairs, only to be stopped and assisted by Anita and Miss Everly to stand on the chairs instead. Nathaniel chuckled and approached them, pulling the two boys into a hug. "What do you need rescuing from, son?" Nathaniel whispered to Liam. "Big Mama says we can't have pie until we finish our vegetables," Liam explained. "And if we finish our vegetables, there'll be no room for pie," Owen added automatically. "Do you grasp the dilemma, Daddy?" Liam queried with dramatic seriousness. Nathaniel cleared his throat to stifle a laugh. "All right, maybe you can have just a quarter of the pie now and save the rest for later," Nathaniel whispered back. Liam and his brother frowned at him as if to say, "What's wrong with you, man?" Then Owen whispered, "It's chicken pie, Daddy," emphasizing his brother's revelation. "Mom's chicken pie," Liam stressed. Nathaniel couldn't help but chuckle. "I understand. Those are delicious. Perhaps we could save it for when we return upstairs then," Nathaniel suggested. The boys' faces lit up at the idea. "You three know we can hear you, right?" Anita chimed in. The boys grinned at her before winking at their dad and settling back into their chairs. Even though Anita wasn't living with them anymore, Andrew still brought her to have dinner with the family sometimes, which invariably led to Anita and Aria discussing some engagement party they were planning. Nathaniel noticed Andrew's absence from the dining room, as he'd typically left Anita with Aria to join the men in the servants' quarters. Nathaniel had immense respect for Andrew's leadership and leading by example without apology, but he figured he would need to speak to him about taking a few hours off sometimes to relax before his girlfriend started to notice he was a workaholic. "Good evening, Anita. And to you too, Miss Everly," Nathaniel greeted warmly, bending over to give Aria's aunt a peck on the cheek. "Good evening to you too," Anita replied with a warm smile. "Good evening, Nathaniel." "Overworking yourself as usual," Miss Everly commented. Nathaniel let out a guilty chuckle. "I promise I took breaks," he replied. Tom Hill muttered, "Liar," and quickly hid it with a cough which made Bella laugh. Nathaniel arched an eyebrow at him as he moved around the table to greet Bella before catching and holding Aria's gaze. She smiled at him, and he crossed the room to stand behind her, pressing his face into the nook of her neck from behind. He wrapped his arms around her to cradle her stomach as he pressed a kiss to the corner of her lips. "Hey you," Aria greeted in a soft whisper. "Hey to you too, my love," he replied in a deep, husky tone. After dinner, Nathaniel noticed the boys' anxious gazes directed at him. He understood they needed his help to smuggle the pie from the dining room upstairs to their room. He knew the importance of helping them stick to the rules, but in this case, the problem wasn't that their big mama didn't want them to eat pie. They just couldn't eat the quantity they wanted at once. The idea of it made him quietly laugh to himself. Since it wasn't something they often did, he signaled to Mrs. Jonas, who came to lean close to him as he spoke. "Could you have someone take a pot pie upstairs?" "Thanks," Nathaniel said. "Yes, sir," the woman replied with a knowing smile and left. Nathaniel's eyes settled on the boys, and they were glowering at him. He almost choked on his water, discreetly patting himself on the chest, looking away and shaking with laughter. He understood they each wanted a pie, but as the parent, he knew what would happen if they stuffed themselves with pie shortly before bedtime. The last thing he wanted was to have to explain to their mother why they had indigestion or couldn't sleep if they developed a stomach upset during the night. Much later, settling down in bed with his arms wrapped around Aria, he broached the subject of Julia's plastic surgery. "Do you advise that we discuss the possibility of plastic surgery with Julia?" Aria shifted in his arms to face him. "Have you gone to see her?" she asked, her eyes dimmed with interest. Nathaniel shook his head. "I was just wondering if she looked as bad as the picture Jake showed me, and if you're advising her to start anew, we should probably help cover up the scars so she can get on with her life. You've removed her stitches, right?" he said, holding back the real reason for his suggestion. Aria furrowed her eyebrows. "You're considering letting her leave?" she asked with concern. "Why don't you think she's ready?" he asked, giving her a searching gaze. "It's been 3 weeks, I think," he added. "Yes, I've removed her stitches and her cast has been replaced with an ankle brace, but her true healing will take months. We can't just, thrust her out there without support," Aria replied. "What kind of support would she require?" Nathaniel asked, making Aria peer intently into his eyes. "Are we putting ourselves in danger by helping her?" "Please be honest with me," Aria implored. "Yes, darling, helping her is putting us at risk, but we have helped. She's better than she was weeks ago, and it's not over. I've made arrangements for her to be taken care of. I just need you, as her doctor, to give me the go-ahead and give her more leverage by giving her a new face, along with a new life she's about to embark on," Nathaniel replied. Aria held his gaze for about a minute before nodding. "We will have to speak with her about it," she replied. Nathaniel nodded. "Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about our trip to Hawaii." "I want the boys to come with us," he said, watching a slow smile animate Aria's face. "Well, the event is created to accommodate families, so why not?" she said, and laughed when Nathaniel let out a relieved sigh. "I just love how you three have bonded," Aria whispered as he pressed a kiss on the tip of her nose. Nathaniel grinned. "Me too. I hope they don't get me in trouble anytime soon with their big mama," he rasped, making her shake with laughter. 2 days later, Aria visited Julia on Madison Avenue to discuss the option of plastic surgery. And just as always, she tried not to stare at the changed face of the woman she knew. Julia was forced to wear glasses now due to the effect of the gunshot to her left eye bone. There was an indentation at the side of the left eye with a thin line of stitches. Her hair was taking ample time to grow. She looked exactly like a woman who had gone through hell and come back. Aria always tried not to stare for too long and make it obvious she was doing a mental comparison of the former to the latter look. She sat down opposite her in the living room, wearing a fitted vest with baggy trousers. She'd lost weight and looked frail, but she looked far better than before. Aria knew it would be a matter of time before her body regained its lost composure. "I don't know," Julia replied with a shrug. "You don't think you need it?" Aria pressed as Anita joined them to sit beside Aria. Although Jake was also there with Andrew, the two men had made themselves scarce. "I'm kind of getting used to seeing myself like this in the mirror," she shrugged again, lowering her gaze, trying to hide her emotional state, but Aria caught the glint of tears in her eyes. "With or without the surgery, I would always have this image in my head," Julia replied, gesturing to her face. "I understand, but you know you will have to get out there and start living again. Starting a new life, to say the truth, would be challenging. We are not asking you to forget your ordeal, but to conceal it just for you, so as not to attract attention and be free to do whatever you want and go where you want." Aria pressed. Julia nodded. "I understand. Can I give you my answer tomorrow, please?" she replied. "Of course," Aria replied and smiled warmly at her. "So how are you? Do you have any complaints? Have you remembered anything yet?" Aria asked in a soft, soothing tone, giving her a warm, friendly smile. Julia hesitated, a behavior Aria was starting to recognize as a sign of reluctance to convey disappointing news. Then she shook her head. I don't remember anything yet. As you can see, I still stutter, and my left eye still waters," she said with an emotional struggle, her face etched with pain as she started to rock back and forth on her seat. "It's okay, Giselle. It's still early," Aria replied. Julia nodded, but her face showed she didn't believe her. After Aria left with Andrew and Anita for some shopping, leaving Jake alone with Julia, Jake was in the kitchen fixing himself a drink when Julia came to stand by the island table. "I heard Dr. Hawthorne wants you to explore plastic surgery," Jake said in his attempt to start a conversation. He had tried to keep from venturing into intimate discussions like they did the last time in the bathroom weeks ago. He needed to keep his head clear and without distractions, especially knowing she would disappear from their lives soon. "I think she's afraid that people might stare when I venture out on my own," she replied, with a laugh that sounded hollow. "Well, that's a solid reason. People can be mean," Jake replied matter-of-factly, holding her gaze. She swallowed softly and nodded, looking away. Then she laughed again, somewhat like self-mockery. "Was that why you didn't want me, Jake? Because of what I look like," she suddenly said, catching him off guard. "What?" he rasped as he put down his drink. "I don't want plastic surgery. I don't care if I disgust you or anyone. As a matter of fact, fuck you, Jake," she cried, and turned to hobble away, struggling to walk with her ankle brace. Jake moved before he could even contain himself. Wrapping one arm around her waist, he lifted her up, and she weakly fought him as she started to cry. Jake pressed her back against a side wall, one hand gripping the nape of her neck, while the other supported her as he pinned her with his body. He pressed his forehead against hers as she continued to struggle against him. "Stop," Jake rasped. When she persisted, he added, "Stop it, Jules. Damn it, I'm trying not to want you. Can't you see that I'm trying to let you go?" His voice was strained with frustration. Julia ceased her resistance, locking eyes with him, tears streaming down her face, her left eye pouring more than the other. "Don't look at me like that, like you don't know. Like you don't know, I don't give a damn how you look, I just want... Damn it," he uttered hoarsely. Julia's chest heaved as she took shaky breaths. The disbelief in her eyes only fueled his desire. He crashed his lips against hers, carrying her to the island table, where he made her sit atop it, using one hand to pull down her trousers. "Jake," Julia moaned as he lifted her from the table to the couch, placing her on the broad cushions. He then stepped back to remove his shirt and trousers. "Jake," she whispered in awe as he towered over her with his big frame. Lowering himself to cover her body with his own, he rasped, "Is this what you want?" Julia quivered uncontrollably, releasing a loud, desire-filled moan that expressed both longing and the profound relief of being fulfilled. "Yes. Yes, Jake," she stammered, overcome with emotion. Moments later, the doorbell rang, sending a jolt of tension through Jake's body. He anticipated the familiar sequence of a knock, followed by the doorbell's chime, mimicking Andrew's routine. But this time, there was only a solitary knock. Reacting swiftly, Jake dressed and deftly carried Julia back into her room. Dashing back to the living room to pack her scattered clothing, he threw them on a side couch and went to lean in close to her face, leaving only a sliver of space between their faces. In a low, commanding tone, he instructed, "Under no circumstances are you to step outside until I return or give you permission. Understand?" Julia nodded slowly, her confusion evident in her eyes. Jake hurried back to the living room, deftly tucking a gun into the back of his trousers band as he made his way to the door. Peering through the peephole, he found nothing. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the door open. On the other side stood a tall, hunky man, his face partially obscured by a cap pulled low over his forehead. With a deliberate movement, he tilted the cap up, revealing a face hardened by determination. He raised his left hand, a gun held firmly, aimed at Jake's forehead. Jake met his gaze, a flicker of fury igniting within him. "Do you have any intention of pulling the trigger, Kimura?" Jake's voice remained low and calm, masking his fear of the man discovering his wife inside the apartment. "It depends," came the reply in a deep baritone as the man cocked the gun. "Where the hell is she, Jake?" Sean Cavalier demanded.